repressive regime. Now, there is a mention in the description of this by Zunis, Kurtz, and Asher of the fact that in many cases, soldiers who were sent out to fire on these crowds defected. So it's like on the field, people realize what they're doing. They remember in the film about Edsa, they're going to come out here and they're going to see their sisters, their brothers, their relatives on the other side. They won't shoot. So this is a phenomenon which you can employ, if you know about it. You can sometimes manipulate to get people to see the humanity of their intended victims. This actually had a powerful effect up to a point in both the Prague Spring Uprising of 1968 and the Tiananmen Uprising, which became a massacre in, I guess it was 84. And that is, you had soldiers who would come in and people would fraternize with them. Of course, nowadays you'd have to also sororize with them because there'd be some lady soldiers, and say, you know, what are you doing here? You know, we're revolutionists just like you. And once you make that human contact, they can't really bring themselves to kill you anymore. And what they did in both these cases in Prague and later in China was to send in special units who were from such a distant part of the country that they didn't even have a common language with the people who were in the uprising. But none of that is directly relevant in Iran. But what is relevant is that soldiers would be ordered to, you know, take control of these squares. They would go there and they'd see these people, just Iranians like them, and they would defect. Now, what Zunis, Kurtz, and Asher don't go on to tell you, partly because it's not very well documented. Okay, so I have to tell you this right up front. This is a little bit anecdotal. I've been spending decades trying to track it down. I can't quite get to something that a journalist would say, okay, this is news. I'm going to trot over to Northgate Hall and publish this. But even if it didn't happen, it's a good myth. A good myth is something that never happened but is always true. Okay, I didn't make up that definition, by the way. So even if it didn't happen, but I think at least the 2/3 of it did happen, then it at least shows us something about the inner dynamics of nonviolence. It could happen. So the next step that I want to take is that in one case, and this is pretty well documented, one of these soldiers, when he saw what he was doing, and he saw that he had no other way out of it, he shot his commanding officer. This is known in Vietnam as fragging, very serious business. There's recently been a film about it called Sir, No Sir, about the defection of American troops in Vietnam, which was millions of times greater than we were given to understand. Somehow it was even before they embedded the journalists in the military. I usually say they were in bed with the military before they got embedded in the military. Okay, that's not a good joke. Okay, move on from here. So this soldier shot his commanding officer and then turned his rifle on himself. That much is pretty documented. The anecdotal part I don't have terribly good evidence for is about what happened in the lead up to that episode. It was a demonstration. There were thousands and thousands of people in the square in Tehran. And by having a rally in the square, those people were undertaking a terrific risk because the Shah did not stop at sending helicopters over the square and machine gunning people. They knew very well that they might be killed. So we're in stage 3, way up on the curve. And this particular demonstration was being addressed by mullahs, by Islamic priests. And it was a mullah who was up there speaking. And this squad, company leader or whatever it was, ordered him shot. And they shot him. So they shot this priest right in front of all of these people. It's like, you know, the assassination of Romero. And here's the shocker. After this man fell, another mullah stepped up to the microphone and said, "Where my brother has fallen, I will carry on." Stood there looking at those soldiers and launched back into the talk. And guess what? He was shot. And he fell, and guess what? A third mullah stood up and said in the same language, "Where my brother has fallen, I will go on." At that point, a shot rang out, and that's when the soldier killed his commanding officer. And then he killed himself, and then the troops dispersed. So that was a rather heavy story for only 10:15 in the morning. I hope you're all fully able to roll with this. But now, do you remember, perchance, some of you who were with us last semester, do you remember something that Gandhi said in connection with the other type of nonviolence in use against armed conflict, namely civilian-based defense, where he was describing in Switzerland what he called the Thermopylae operation or something like that, where, let's say, what they were worried about at that time was a Japanese invasion, okay? And he wanted to come up with an alternative for the British plan, which was very predictable, stay there and fight to the last sword. Actually, the British plan was to get out of India immediately the minute the Japanese invaded, but nobody knew that at that time. I thought it was very interesting. Nobody knew it. But they were challenging Gandhi and saying, what would you do? You're a nonviolent person. You don't even do ambulance corps anymore. How would you defend your country? With the implication being, if you can't come up with a plan, nonviolence is no good, and we have to have armies and so forth. But of course, it's totally illogical because they didn't know that we were way up on the curve and all. Okay, everybody's very ignorant. We know this. We don't hate them. We don't despise them. We pity them. Anyway, here you are. Gandhi had to come up with a plan. He said, men, women, and children walk to the border and stand there. And they said, but the Japanese will massacre them. And then what did he say? Remember, Amy?
He said they would be able to
Yeah, that's right. His exact language was, and any army which advanced over the dead bodies of unarmed men, women, and children would find itself unable to repeat the experiment. So this episode in Tehran is a good example of that. Yes, you can stand there and you can kill innocent, non-resisting people if you've been dehumanized enough. But where I want to go with this is to say that nobody, practically nobody, can be dehumanized completely. There's no way to totally eradicate that spark of human empathy within every human being. So if it's been buried very deeply, you'll have to suffer a lot to awaken it. If it's only been slightly buried, you don't have to suffer as much. Depends when you start, and so on. Harvey?
So was this protest kind of end?
Oh, it was very close to the end. Yet once he started massacring hordes of innocent people, it was getting close to the end. Even though the then president of the U.S., who was, not the war president, he was the prayer breakfast president, Jimmy Carter, said the Shah of Iran is our best friend in the Middle East. So, yeah, Matt?
I was wondering, what about the example of the John Reed in Sudan, like Darfur?
Yeah.
That's been going on for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's just a matter of degree, I think, Matt, and it's also the way they've been massacring. I would have to say that in the case of some of those people in those tribal conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa who have been brought in as soldiers when they were like 14-year-old kids, boys and girls, that's probably the deepest grade of dehumanization that we've got to deal with. It's very, very deep. And I'm standing here and saying my belief, I've got no way to prove it, my belief is that there'd be a way to reach even those people. There would be a way, but the cost would be horrendous, of course. So this is why in the course of making someone into a soldier, you have to dehumanize that person, and you forget that this is exactly the way violence always operates. You sacrifice the future for the present. So now you have these people coming back. 550,000 GIs are coming back at some point, dead or alive, from Iraq. They have been deeply, severely traumatized. Who wants to summarize what the plan is of, say, the Veterans Administration or any other unit of the American military or American civilian entities to rehumanize them so they can be good, civilized people when they're released? What do we have stacked up? How much money are we willing to spend for this? You got it. Nada. Zip. Niente. So that's violence for you. Sorry, I'm losing it here. I'm getting out of control. But what we were saying, I guess, Matt, is that the belief that I'm unwilling to relinquish is that it would be possible, whether they've been like somewhat dehumanized, like our soldiers in Iraq right now. And incidentally, there's a good documentary about that too. It's called Ground Truth by Patricia Fulcrod. Very good. I'm good in the sense that it's true and right on, not good in the sense that it's inspiring, uplifting, or tells you anything about nonviolence. But even when people have been systematically dehumanized, which has been going on since the Mau Mau insurrections in Kenya, you force people to do things that just completely dehumanize them, so you can use their dehumanization against somebody else, not realizing that you pay a human cost and it's going to redound on you. I would say, and I have no way to prove it, but there's no such thing as eradicating that spark of human empathy and compassion in a person. And there are many very interesting anecdotes of how it can be reawakened in people. In fact, in Burundi, in Rwanda, in other places right now, they're trying out very, very interesting post-conflict mechanisms to get people who utterly cannot trust each other anymore, because they were next-door neighbors and the next thing you know they were slaughtering. They get them back together so they can reach out to one another. And I'll be participating in something like that in Bosnia-Herzegovina sometime in September, where the dehumanization maybe wasn't quite so bad and a lot of time's gone by. Okay, so I knew I shouldn't have had that chai before I came here. I completely can't stop myself. Anybody have any questions before I stop me before I lecture again? Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Let's say like a soldier, like the first time you massacred,
Uh-huh.
where should the blame go?
Where should the blame go? Well, I have a good way to get out of that question, and I think I'm going to use it, and that is that, PNV people, principled nonviolence folks, we don't spend a lot of time blaming. It's not really a moral issue with us. In fact, in your reader, thank you for reminding me. Remember, you paid good money for it. Might as well use it. There is an article by Jack Duvall and Peter Ackerman on the color revolutions in Eastern Europe. Excellent article. We're going to talk about it next week. But at one point, you will see that he says that nonviolence is not a moral issue. It is simply strategic. This is an interesting debate that's going on in the field. All 7 of us have been talking about it for weeks. Because really, it's a debate that isn't going on in the field. I keep emailing these people saying, shouldn't we be talking about this? And they either say no or they talk about something else. And they have all the money, so it's not going to happen. Anyway, the point is this. The strategic nonviolent camp at the moment is setting up a polarity between moral and practical, which is where they talk about strategies. So in order to be practical, you don't want to be moral, is what they're saying. And therefore, they don't want to talk to us because they characterize us as coming on with some kind of moral framework. Whereas for us, and you can document this very well from Gandhi, Immanuel Kant, characters from Star Trek have been known to say things like this. In reality, there is no difference between what is moral and what is pragmatically effective. That's why the work versus work thing becomes so important, because strategically you might gain something in the short run, but you'll end up paying much more in the long run. So how practical is that? Did you want to? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. 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 This is a very, very good point, which I'm embarrassed to say it never occurred to me before now. But the split in Western Civ that starts somewhere in the High Renaissance between religion and science has given us these hopeless dichotomies. And that split never happened in India. If you read, for example, there's an Indian text on linguistics, which I spent a lot of time studying for reasons that are not particularly pertinent here. But I was very struck by the fact that the first line of this is in verse. It's a poem on linguistics. So you might think it's a very scientific document that's going to talk about, phonemics and where the tongue articulates with the hard palate and stuff. But the first line actually is see? Which means the supreme reality is without beginning and without end, and it is this reality alone that is the essence of all linguistic sound. So can you imagine getting up in front of, let's say, the American Linguistics Association and starting off with some kind of an invocation of the supreme reality? I think you'd probably lose your license, whatever kind you have. And I think that's a very pertinent observation, because in India, science and religion were not two distinct things. The problem never came up for Gandhi. Yeah. So what we're really talking about is not morality versus pragmatism, but the underlying invisible forces that determine in the long run what will really be practical. John? Yeah. Okay. See, here's the difficulty. If you start from practical strategies with this shallow notion of what's practical, eventually you lose the means-ends contiguity. And you say, okay, we got to go forget about the quality of the means. We'll use anything necessary to get to that. Yeah. Start from this, what I consider a mistake, and you'll get to this mistake. Okay? Anything else? I want to say one more thing, sort of a general overview sort of thing about the Iranian uprising, and then we'll move on to some of the others. So, anything else? Okay. Good. Okay. Oh, that's too bad. It was such a nice, clean blackboard. In discussing the Iranian Revolution in the book, they make a very interesting, rather somber point. And that is that in a way, this was even worse than what we've already seen about the Philippine uprising namely in Philippine uprising, People Power uprising, you had a really successful overthrow, installation of what should have been a perfectly decent government, and the next thing you know, it's sliding back into the same old economic disaster, or worse, for the poor people. Well, in Iran, it was even worse than that because you went immediately from a successful nonviolent revolution to a brutally repressive regime. The Ayatollah simply replaced one kind of fanatical ideology with another, and there was immediate tip over there. This is, you know, if we want to go back further in history, you could say, well, I was going to talk about the Russian Revolution, but that was never nonviolent in any way, shape, or form. But here you had the Ayatollah from Paris, and this is another complicated problem, is when you have people in the diaspora telling you what to do. It's like you may have noticed in the descriptions of the first Intifada that one of the things that the Palestinians on the ground had to do was distance themselves from the PLO. Because the PLO was off there in Morocco, maybe some of them were still hanging on in Lebanon, but they've been out of the country for 25 years. They didn't know what was going on, and it's very easy to sit there in Paris and say, sacrifice yourselves. It's not quite the same thing as being there. Anyway, here he is calling on these people to make the supreme sacrifice and never resort to weapons. Okay, so from our point of view, that looks like an extremely stage 3 emergency nonviolent uprising. Sorry it got so bad, but there's nasty countries out there doing nasty things, we can't help it. So it looks like a perfectly, I was going to say perfectly reasonable, that sort of doesn't fit. It looks like the right call given these horrible circumstances. The almost immediate defection from nonviolence the minute it succeeds tells us two things. It tells us that it could not have been that nonviolent under the surface when you really look at what was going on and what it was based on. Then you begin to realize that a lot of this, you know, never fire back and let yourself be killed, was partly tying into Islamic ideology and not into more balanced concepts of self-sacrifice. So it couldn't have been nonviolent. If it were, we would have had a better result from it. Secondly, it shows us, and I've made this point in a little booklet called Steps of Nonviolence, which I really would like people to buy because I'm trying to get it off the shelf so we can use Hope or Terror instead, so that Carrie and I can become rich and famous. What it shows us is that the moment of victory can be extremely dangerous for nonviolent movements. You remember Gandhi's famous quip when things started falling apart for him and people were not nonviolent anymore, they were just grabbing for power. He said, well, you know, I was on the train to Rishikesh and they got off in Delhi. Rishikesh being a place where all the sages have meditated from time immemorial, and Delhi being the government. You know, so it looks like you're on the same train, but some people get off at a much earlier stop. And incidentally, that happened here in the free speech movement. There were some people who were in it for a complete nonviolent spiritual revolution, never mind who was in it for that reason. And there were some people because they were in it because they hated the administration of the University of California, Berkeley, and wanted to make them feel bad. So up to a point, you're doing exactly the same thing, and then suddenly there's this very awkward split. And this happened in Germany in the 80s a great deal when the Greens Party was trying to assert itself. We had this split between the Fundis and the Realos. It's been a bane of the peace movement all along. Here we are. Now, another thing we could use to characterize this is to say that the Iranian Revolution was a superb example of obstructive program. Given their horrific circumstances, given the fact that they had no time to do the training, you know, they could not ask for David Hartsoe to come over there and give them nonviolence workshops. First of all, he would not have been let into the country. Second of all, there was no time. They're plunged into it. They did obstructive program. Given their circumstances, they did it terrific. You know, we're going to stand here, go ahead and shoot us, and they shoot until they reach the point where they cannot repeat the experiment, and then you win. Okay. But what was missing? Well, first of all, what I've already mentioned, the deep cultivation of nonviolence was not really there. It could not have been. But what was missing was constructive program. And at the end, or by the end of this semester, we'll be talking about several movements that we will see have terrific constructive program and no obstructive program. And one of those movements is the largest social movement possibly in the world today, the movement of landless workers in Brazil. 50,000 families have been given land. Like 1.5 million people belong to this movement. They're translating my book into Portuguese. I mean, it's just sweet from so many points of view. But I'm going to show you a clip from a film, a documentary made about them called Strong Roots, to show when these people are attacked by the police, by the paramilitaries, by the thugs who've been hired by the people who own the latifundios and have been seriously attacked. They don't know what to do. They throw rocks at them. I think weak violence is probably worse than strong violence, or certainly worse than nonviolence. So we'll discuss all of this in greater detail, but I just want to say that as a way of comparing movements, you could look at this as a great trajectory where we have OP without CP and we have CP without OP. This is going on in the world. The result of this is that by today, 1,000 workers, landless people, have been killed by these paramilitaries and police and so forth. And I maintain if they had, then you had to deal with conflict, probably maybe 10 people would have been killed, something like that. And then it would have stopped, just to pick some numbers out of thin air here. So wouldn't it be wonderful, and this is where all this leads, wouldn't this be wonderful if we had a movement that combined CP and OP, that had constructive program and had obstructive program, and knew when to use which? You had some strategic leadership. I venture to say, I know I'm venturing to say a lot here today. That's partly that chai latte that I had. I